Okay, hey Facebook, hey Instagram, this is great. I'm looking forward to this today. So, okay, Facebook, God, I know everybody's like, oh, how close can you get me to your screen today? Okay, so I guess I'm going to have to hold this. I'm not getting my iPad to do the right angle and look at both. So anyway, thanks everyone for joining me today. I am coming to you from my office in Florida, and I'm excited you guys could be here with me today. I am here with you for the next 30 minutes, and I'm taking your questions about resin. I've had a few people already email me say they can't make it and have emailed their questions ahead of time. So if you are joining now and can't stay for the whole thing or have to drop off, this will be recorded for later. Come over to our Facebook page where it'll be stored under videos. I'll also have this up on YouTube in a little bit. And if you're watching this on Instagram, you do get to watch the replay for the next 24 hours. Oh, hi, Fred. This is Fred. Everyone say hi to Fred. Right? Can everybody see Fred? This is Fred. Fred's a little jealous of the kitten. In case you didn't know it, he'll probably be making an appearance too. We got a little gray kitten. Some of you know we lost Studio Kitty back in December, and we decided we had room for another kitty here in the office. So anyway, he's playing in here somewhere, and Fred has not taken too well to having a new kitten. Fred's kind of been a little put out. But anyway, okay, hey, I see tons of people. Oh, look, Fred, you got a hi from Carol Lee. That's so sweet. Carol Lee in Europe said hi. Okay, he's watching me now from the floor. So anyway, hand up if no resin studio is complete without a cat, right? I think it's pretty cool. So I love it. Hi, I see all the waves on Instagram. This is awesome. I see Kathy from Redding, California. So glad you could join us. Just another minute or two to let some more people jump in. If I do not get to your question today, if you're on Instagram, you can private message me and I'll do my best to get it answered. If you're on Facebook, by all means, type it as we go along. If I don't get it answered, I will do my best to get back to it later, and I do read the comments and that kind of thing. And Instagram, you're welcome to pop over here too to Facebook and leave a question as well. So hang in there for the next, we got another 28 minutes. If you hang until the end, I do have a little something special for you. So, okay. All right, everyone, you ready? So I got a lot of questions on using resin and what resin to use when. And so I'm going to just start and take the first few minutes to try and cover that as best I can. And we'll launch into some other questions as well. Okay, so when it comes to using a resin, there's, where do you start, right? There's so many brands, there's so many different kinds. How do you know what to use? How do you know what's best for your project? So the first one I'm going to talk about is silicone, because that's the easiest one, at least for me, to address. And at least when it comes to using silicone, the only time I ever use it is if I'm making a mold of something. So could you make silicone bracelets and jewelry and other kinds of stuff? Yeah, you could, totally. But that's just not something that interests me. But yeah, you could. So at least in my realm and what I do, and at least when I'm dealing with so many of you, pretty much when it comes to using silicone, you're just using it to mold other things. So that's where we got it there. But once you're outside of the silicone realm, then we have three other things to talk about. And I realized as I wrote these that they're going to show up backwards. So we're going to talk about polyester resin, right? Polyester. We're going to talk about epoxy, and we're going to talk about polyurethane resin. Okay, so let's kind of make this like a little game show thing. Everybody holds up their answers. So first, if you're going to make resin jewelry, okay, if you're going to make resin jewelry, which one do you want to use? Would you believe me if I said you could use all three? All three you could use to make resin jewelry and crafts, okay? So let's talk about this for a minute. Epoxy is generally where I recommend everyone start, especially if you're a beginner. Epoxies are generally the easiest to work with. They mix 1-to-1, they mix 2-to-1. Oftentimes you can mix them by weight instead of volume. They're probably the most forgiving of your environmental factors, and I think they're just the easiest for beginners to work with, okay? So why might you not want to use an epoxy? If you want something that you can use with power tools, say you're doing some woodworking and you want to be able to use it on a lathe, or you want to be able to buff it with polishing compound or something like that, then many epoxies will not withstand the heat and friction of that type of work. So, you know, I don't know that, you know, it's not necessarily the best for every situation. So in that case, you can look at either a polyurethane or a polyester. So if you want to do polyurethane for jewelry, polyurethanes are great, you know, especially since you can get some really quick curing ones. We sell one from Illuminate that cures in as little as 15 minutes. And they cure very hard. Power tools, polishing, work really well. What you need to know about polyurethanes, though, is that they're very moisture sensitive, okay? So whereas you can sometimes get away with using non-traditional colorants in your epoxy, like some paints and that kind of thing, you're not going to be able to do that with a polyurethane, okay? So polyurethanes are very moisture sensitive, and if you're using a clear polyurethane, you're probably going to have to use something called a pressure pot to get it bubble free. And what a pressure pot does is you put your casting inside the pot, you use another machine to apply pressure inside the pot, and it squeezes the bubbles down so small that you can't see them, okay? So the other thing you need to know about polyurethanes, especially the clear ones, is they have a short shelf life, okay? So you really need to be careful in the amount you buy to make sure you get it used up within about 3 months or so, okay? Gary's reminding me that my signs are backwards. Yeah, I realized that right as we got started with this. But anyway, okay, so polyester you could also use to make jewelry and crafts. Great because it does good with tools, does great with polishing compound and a buffing wheel. It works really, really well. The problem with polyurethane, at least as I see it, there's two big ones. Number one, polyurethane, when you cast it, or not polyurethane, sorry, polyester. When you cast polyester, it's not as simple as so much A to so much B and blend it together. You have to use polyester with the end in mind. And the reason that's important is you end up using drops of hardener per ounce of resin, depending on the depth of your casting. So the thinner your casting, the more hardener you have to use. Okay, so that's just talking about stuff for jewelry. And thanks everyone. I see all these people joining in and waving and saying hi. Hi, Albert and Tanaya in Italy. And I saw Arlene. And I do see a couple other questions. I'm trying to mentally keep track of some of the questions I'm seeing pop up, and I'll see if I can't get to them in a little bit. So, okay. So we talked about these 3 resins for jewelry purposes. Okay, so what if you're making small scale crafts? Okay, you want to make some like chess pieces or little Lego figurines. Yep, any of these 3 should work. You can just, it kind of depends on what you want to do. And what, you know, what's easiest for you, and, you know, kind of what's most important, you know, in terms of your end project, but any of these 3 should work. Okay, now let's get a little more complicated. What if you are trying to work with wood and resin? Okay, wood and resin, what do you know? What do you think? Da, 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 da. Okay, anybody say polyester? Okay, no, you do not want to use polyester resin with wood. The reason being is polyester resin shrinks the most as it cures, okay? So resin, when you mix the 2 parts, it heats up, right? That's what causes the chemical reaction to cure. As it cools, it shrinks a little bit. Polyester has the most shrinkage. So what I hear from people is they'll be like, you know what? I mixed up some polyester resin. I put it in the cavity. I put it in the piece of wood and everything cured. And then I take it out and I've got a piece of polyester and a piece of wood. And that's because as the polyester resin cured, it pulled away from the wood. And so it cured fine. It didn't stay stuck to the wood. So in that case, you can use an epoxy or a polyurethane. If you want to be able to machine it like on a lathe, or run it through, you know, other big power tools and that kind of thing, a polyurethane is where you want to go, okay? Now, I will tell you, I do know some woodworking people who will use an epoxy with their wood stuff, okay? I will tell you, that's not something I have a lot of experience in, and quite frankly, they all tell me they have to take some extra steps to make sure that their resin, their epoxy and wood projects stay cooler, because epoxies in general just don't like the heat from the friction from using a belt sander and stuff to grind it and cut it. So I'm not saying that it can't be done. I mean, there are wood people doing it. I'm telling you that if you're going to do it this way, you got to take some extra steps and and just kind of know what you're getting into. But, you know, I know a lot of people, if you're trying to turn, you know, wood for bowls or duck calls or just other kind of stuff, the polyurethane's your best bet. Okay? All right. So, next question I get, if you're going to put resin on a countertop, which one do you use? You need to go with an epoxy, okay? If we're doing wood or if we're doing resin on a countertop, we've got to do an epoxy, and here's why. Polyurethane and polyesters are not self-leveling, okay? Self-leveling means once you apply the resin, it wants to even out and kind of form just a nice smooth surface, okay? Also known as a doming resin. So I know, especially for those of you that make jewelry and you're putting stuff into pendants and bezels, you usually want a doming resin. And those are ones where the surface tension is thick enough that it'll kind of even out on the top and make a nice level surface. Polyesters and polyurethanes do not do that, okay? So you want something that's going to stay in a nice dome on a countertop, and that will be an epoxy, okay? And I just saw a question come through here on Facebook a little bit ago on asking if there's a food-safe resin. I will include a link when I'm done here. We do sell the Alumilite Amazing Clear Cast Epoxy Resin that if you follow the directions and allow for a full 7-day cure, it is considered safe for food contact, okay, once we get done with that. All right, so if you're doing resin for artwork, what do you want to make sure and use? Epoxy, okay, and for the same reasons as doing the countertops. Because you want stuff to be able to level. You want to make sure you have a nice self-leveling surface. And two, you know, this is, you know, it's going to make a nice smooth surface. You know, something that doesn't self-level, it's just you're going to have divots and it's just not going to be even and you'll end up having to sand it and it's not, probably not the best choice. Becky on Facebook is asking if there's a UK supplier for the food safe resin. That I'm not aware of. However, Becky, we do ship this to the UK. The Alumilite Amazing Clear Cast Resin can ship to you worldwide without any restrictions, and we can ship it to you in the UK. So, okay. All right, so any other questions before I kind of dive into some other stuff here about why to use this resin or why not to use this resin? Any other questions before I get going on that? Okay. So I know it's a lot. If you guys ever have any questions about am I buying the right resin for my project, please, you know, stop and ask us before you place your order. We want to make sure. Hi, Fred. Fred and I want to make sure that you get the right resin for your project. Okay, thanks for joining me, Fred. He's like the best. He's the best buddy. So okay. All right, so I see a couple of questions. I see a question now about asking what is the best color for coloring your resin. Okay. So first and foremost, my best advice to give you is whatever brand of resin you're using is to use that manufacturer's colorants. And the reason I say that is A, you can be hopefully assured that the resin's going to cure, and B, you're going to be assured that whatever color you get, or like if you think you're getting red, once you add it to that resin, you should still get red. And I say that because every resin's a little different, and sometimes there's additives added to the resin so that you get a clear finish, a clear finished product. And so the reason that's important is sometimes some of those colorants can interfere. Well, I don't want to say interfere. They're additive so that when you add then more color to it, you may end up getting something a little different. And where I usually see that is with the yellow, greens, and blues. Sometimes you guys might see some, sometimes resins will have like a blue tint to it, and that's to help get it a final clear appearance. Sometimes greens and yellows, and sometimes other blues. When you add to that, you may not get the blue you think you're getting. You get something closer to green. Or sometimes you add, you know, yellow, and you think you're going to get more yellow, but you end up getting green. So first and foremost, I would tell you that the manufacturer's colorants are probably best. Outside of that, other resin manufacturers' colors generally will do well in another brand. You know, I can't guarantee it across the board, but usually that's the case. And then besides that, then you know what, do some other fun stuff, right? I mean, that's part of the fun with resin, you know, learn the rules and then learn when you can break them, right? So in general, paints usually work. You know, the problem with paints is that they've got moisture in them that can keep resin from curing. Food coloring is not something that I recommend. Alcohol-based colorants generally work in the sense that they don't interfere with coloring, but sometimes some of the colors won't stay that color in resin. I've also used chalk, like, you know, you get like pastel chalks or something. I've done that. I've done spices like paprika. I've just done some other kind of stuff. So my best advice to you, if you want to give them a try a little experiment. You know, don't commit to doing somebody's line of like bridesmaid jewelry in this really super hot pink, and then you can't, you know, everything just stays a goopy mess. So you know, your best bet's to go with stuff designed for resin, but outside of that, you know, just kind of go crazy and have fun with it. You know, learn what you can. So, okay, a few more comments saying hi to Fred. Fred, that's so sweet. Okay, so I saw a question here a little bit ago on Instagram asking my thoughts on UV resin. So here are my thoughts on UV resin. I have used UV resin. It's not something we sell. I will tell you that if we have a product for sale on Resin Obsession, it's a product that I would use. I'm not gonna sell something that I don't believe in or have confidence in or feel like it's a good product to share with you guys. And one of those things that I've tried that just I didn't feel was a good fit for me was UV resin, and I'll tell you why. Number one, UV resin is incredibly expensive. For the amount of resin you get, you could buy like 10 times more regular epoxy resin, 2-part epoxy resin, for the same amount of UV resin. It's incredibly expensive. Number two, it has a really short shelf life. So you've got to use it pretty quickly, and you've got to store it properly. Like, it comes in a dark bottle. You need to keep it inside a closet or, you know, dark shelf, you know, in a cupboard or something, to make sure that it doesn't go bad on you. Third thing is that if you're not in a place that's really sunny, like we're pretty fortunate here in Florida, but it has to have UV light to cure. So if you're in a place, say like the Pacific Northwest, and it's rainy all the time, you could go days without enough UV light to make it cure, which means you have to buy a lamp. So, you know, those lamps are $30, $40, $50. And then the last thing was that, you know, I really felt like it was only good for bezels. You know, if you just want a thin layer of resin, a glossy layer for bezels, then, you know, that's fine. But if you're looking to do something in molds or just, you know, some other big projects, it just didn't, I felt like it was very limited in what it did. I felt like you can just get so much more with a 2-part resin, okay? So a question about the UV resin, does it change with temperature or light? It has to have UV light, so it's not related to the temperature. So you can't like put it in an oven and wait for it to cure. It has to have the UV light. And it does cure quickly. It does cure in about 10 minutes. But for me, it just, I just didn't think it was a good fit for what I wanted to do. So, okay. So I see a question here on Facebook wanting to know about stabilizing your item first or just making sure it's dry. So I'm assuming, it looks like this is from Chad. So I'm assuming, Chad, you're talking about adding stuff into the resin, okay? So before you add something into resin, you absolutely 110% sure, needs to make sure that it's dry. And so if you're ever wondering if something will change once it gets in resin, ask yourself if getting it wet will make a difference. Okay, so if you were to dunk it in a glass of water, is this, whatever it is, going to change color? Then the answer, and if the answer is yes, then you need to seal it and make sure it's fully dry before you put it back in the resin. So whether that's paper, a photograph, a piece of fabric, something like that. And we've got a couple videos on our YouTube channel showing a couple different methods, both using glue and using something like packing tape to seal your item. Now, the other thing I would tell you too is if you have something that is really porous, even though getting it wet may not change it once you put it in resin, I would still tell you to seal it, because if it's porous, it's going to trap air bubbles that will release once you put it in the resin. So say, for example, you have a piece of bone or you have a piece of wood, same thing. Even though it might be really, really dry, we don't want it to release air bubbles once it gets in the resin. And so that something like that needs to be sealed before you put it into the resin. Okay. And I see, yeah, Chad specifically asking about wood blanks. And yes, you're correct. You need to stabilize it with something to seal it. I don't have any experience with this, but I've heard a lot of the woodworkers talk about using a product called cactus juice, and that's all I know. So I don't know how they do it, but I hear a lot of them like cactus juice, and then they will use it in the resin. So, okay. So I see another question along that line about what can you put an item in resin while it is wet? And the answer, unfortunately, to that is no, because that extra moisture could keep your resin from curing. So you want to make sure something is completely dry before you put it in your resin. Otherwise, it's just, even if your resin does cure, it could stay rubbery or kind of bendable or that kind of thing. So, okay. All right, everyone. Oh, I see a question from Joanna about using Epsom salt crystals in resin. Great question. I have never tried that. I would expect them to dissolve just because essentially the Epsom salt, because the crystals, whether it's Epsom salts or I don't know, any other kind of crystals, I would expect some kind of moisture to just cause them to dissolve. Okay. So, all right, I see some other people joining in. So I have a question here. I'm looking at my inbox. Hang tight. So it's a question from Lindell in Australia, and he was specifically wondering why sometimes his resin cures and sometimes his resin doesn't. Okay, so I will tell you, in my experience of doing resin for many, many years, I will tell you 75% of the time when I'm looking at either my own mistakes or I'm looking at what customers have done, it comes down to two things. You have got to properly measure your resin, okay? And I know there are other people out there who do stuff on YouTube that just kind of show like a little cap or use a little spoon and do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Okay, and I'm sure that works for them sometime. I will tell you what I do every time, and that is I use graduated mixing cups. We have them in our store. We have them in a couple sizes. They've got marks. You've got to be incredibly careful with what you measure, okay? And you know what? If you're careful when you use the cups, I also have a video showing you how to clean them out when you're done, so you can reuse them. So first thing is you got to make sure and properly measure. Second thing is that you've got to completely mix your resin. And once again, it's not just simple. You pour one into the cup and you do a little stirring and hope for the best. My personal rule is I mix the two parts together for 10% of the resin's pot time. So for example, the pot time of this super clear resin is about 20 to 25 minutes. So I mix the resin for 2 to 2.5 minutes. And during that time, I'm scraping the sides of my cup, scraping off my stir utensil, and I mix more, scrape, mix more, scrape, mix more, okay? So where that generally will come in, or where people will see a problem is I'll hear, yeah, you know, I poured the first few pendants and they did great, and then like the last 2 or 3 I poured, they just stayed sticky. And usually it's because we're all cheapies, right? We've all spent this money on resin and we've worked really hard to mix it, and so we want to scrape out that last bit on the cup. Well, if you're not careful in mixing, that unmixed resin is sticking to the side of your cup, and so that's why when you put it in, you know, your project, that's why that last one ends up staying goopy. So pretty cool. So, okay, and then I saw a question somebody was asking about cleaning the cups. We do have a video on that on our YouTube channel, and I'll see if I can't link to that here in the Facebook comments here. So let's see. Okay, so Ruby is, what advice would I give to someone who's new to resin and doesn't know where to start? Well, Ruby, we've got a lot of beginner articles. I'll be happy to link to them here. The best advice I can give you is just start. I'm here to tell you, you're going to make mistakes, okay? And I think that's where everybody gets, and I get it. You know, you bought the resin, you've set aside an afternoon. The last thing you want is to have this gooey disaster. But I'm here to tell you, the only reason I got good at resin is because I made mistakes. And you will learn so much, and you will learn what to do or not to do next time. And that's the best I can give you. And if you enjoy the journey, you'll come back and do it again. And just don't be afraid. Just jump in, make it, have a lot of fun with it. Start small. I will tell you that too. Start small. Don't have this grandiose idea that you're going to create this huge resin sculpture that's going to have like a fountain through it and all that. Start small. Start small. Gain some skills. Don't be afraid of the mistakes you're going to make, and have a good time. So, okay. All right. So I see Just some other questions here. Okay, so I see a question from Christina. How can I remove air bubbles from bigger blanks like 4x4? So Christina, it sounds like you're casting wood and resin together, and if that's the case, then you're probably going to have to use a pressure pot, right, Fred? So you're going to have to use something like a pressure pot to help squeeze down those bubbles so that you can't see them anymore. So okay. All right, so guys, we have 5 more minutes together. I've probably got time for one more question before I got something to share with you. What do you say, Fred? He's being such a ham today. Okay, perfect. Let me see what we got here. All right. Okay, Jay's wanting to know about adding human or pet hair and ashes to a memento piece. Yes, those work really well. We've got a tutorial on that too. Same thing, you want to make sure it's dry. And you want to, when I did pet hair, I sealed it, and it'll show that in the tutorial as well. So you just want to make sure everything's dry. You should know that with the ashes, they're going to change color, like they're going to look a little wet. It's kind of like sand. There's just not a good way to seal it so that it stays that color. But, you know, I would dare say that people just mostly like having the piece near them. And so even if the color isn't what they were expecting, generally most people really like it. So, okay, all these people waving. All right, okay. All right, so one more question, and then we'll talk about what I got for you. So Carolee wants to know, what would cause epoxy resin to start steaming? Okay, this is a really great question. This is an important question. So when you guys are using a resin, Fred, your tail's in the way. Hold on, Fred. Okay, so when you guys are using a resin, you need to know the minimum mixing amount and the maximum mixing amount. Okay, and here's why that's important. In order for resin to start curing, you have to have a minimum amount of resin and hardener for the resin and hardener to, once you mix them together, to generate enough heat for it to cure, okay? So the manufacturer should be able to tell you the minimum mixing amount. And it's usually, you know, could be, you know, half an ounce, quarter of an ounce, just every manufacturer, it's a little different, okay? The maximum mixing amount, however, is also important. That's the maximum amount that when you go over that amount, what happens is that heat reaction occurs very quickly and your resin starts to cure very quickly. And so, Carolee, if you saw resin steaming, that's probably what happened, is you mixed more than the maximum amount recommended by the manufacturer. And so the resin, it's kind of like, it's an exponential thing, and then when you reach a certain level, it just kind of takes off. So it was probably more than the manufacturer recommends. So for each resin, it's different. Whatever resin you're using, you should be able to contact the manufacturer, and they should be able to share that information with you. So, okay. All right. So, okay, we got just 2 more minutes. So I want to share something with you. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining in today. If I didn't get to your questions, if you're on Facebook, I will try and get to them here in a few minutes and answer some questions and include links. Instagram, if I didn't get to you, feel free to private message me, and I'll do what I can, or pop over here to Facebook and leave your question here. Our Facebook page is /Your Resin Obsession. Okay, so thanks to everyone for joining in today. And I don't know if you were on our Facebook page last Thursday, but I asked, other than resin, what else in your studio could you not live without? And overwhelmingly, the response was glitter. Okay, and I'm not gonna lie, who doesn't love a good bottle of glitter? So glitter got me thinking about colorants, and right, I mean, clear resin's great, but sometimes you gotta color it too, so I love having options. So I wanna give you guys a coupon code today, okay? So if you're watching this later, please pay attention. I wanna make sure there's no misunderstandings in case you're not watching this live, and who can use the coupon and for how long and this and that and the other, okay? So I'm giving you a coupon for $5 off any color purchase of $10 or more on resinobsession.com, okay? So whether it's a liquid colorant, a powder colorant, or somewhere in between, any of the colorants, okay? So any of the liquid stuff, the glitters, the powders, the Pearlexes, anything like that. $5 off a purchase of $10 or more on any of the colorant products. Coupon code expires either tomorrow night, Wednesday night, April 25th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, and that's April 25th, 2018, or for the next 25 customers. Okay, so everybody's got that. 25 customers, or it expires April 25th, 2018 at 11:59 p.m. Okay, good. All right, so here's your code. The code is 5. C-O-L-O-R and the number 5, right? Gotta think about how I'm drawing this, okay? Color 5. $5 off any color and purchase of $10 or more, okay? All right, everyone, I have kept you 30 minutes. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining me today. I'm gonna try and get in here and answer some questions, and I appreciate you guys stopping by, and what do you say we do this again sometime, okay? All right, everyone, we'll see you later.